Good evening and Happy New Year, and welcome back to Bible Basics with Pastor Steve. First time we have gathered since before Christmas. It's good to be back and good to be sort of back into my ordinary weekly routine. It's not going to actually be not that there's ever anything normal, but so things are going to be a little up in the air for a little bit. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Tonight's lesson is David Fights for the Throne, based on 2 Samuel chapters 2 and 3. Good evening, John. Good evening, Stella. Good evening, Mike and Kim. Welcome, guys. And if you haven't said hi yet, please do say hi if you're comfortable with that and tell us where you're joining us from. So, first week back, and next week we're going to be off again. At least I think we are. And the reason for that is I'm on the board of Ordained Ministry, and next week we'll be having our provisional exam. And unless it gets canceled for snow, next Tuesday night I will be in Fulton at Baltimore Washington Conference headquarters, and we'll be engaged in the provisional members examination. Hello, Cindy. Hello, Barbara. Hey, Barbara. Good to see you. Good to hear from you, rather. So, if I'm in Fulton next week, I won't be here next week. And if I'm not in Fulton, then I'll probably be snowed into the house. I'm not sure. So, in all likelihood, there will not be a lesson next week. But when we reconvene on the 13th, we're going to have a slight format, well, a big format change, but a temporary format change. And here's the reason for that. So, Otterbein Church here has an annual program during the Lenten season called Grace, Graze, and Grow, where we get together, we have a meal, we pray, and then we have various courses and other types of things that people can take or participate in over the course of the evening. And this year I'm going to be teaching a class on Will Willimon's book, Fear of the Other. I've not taught a class like this during Grace, Graze, and Grow before. Last year, I believe I'm pretty sure I suspended class during Grace, Graze, and Grow last year because I participated in a class. This year I'm going to be teaching one, and I'm looking forward to that, but I don't want to suspend class because I feel like we lose momentum, and I'm always afraid that we'll lose people who fall out of the habit if we're out for too long. And we were just off for 2 weeks. We're going to be off for another week, so we will continue to have class during Grace, Graze, and Grow, but we will not be doing the same format because I simply don't think I'm going to have time to prepare for the Grace, Graze, and Grow class based on the Willimon book, and also have time to prepare for this class the way I've been doing it. So what we'll be doing during Lent is that after I teach my class to the folks here in person, I'll come back on here and I will give you guys sort of a 30-minute synopsis of what we talked about. So if you're interested in that, I recommend you get a copy of the book and read the book. If you're not able to be here in person, of course, so the book is Will Willimon's Fear of the Other, and we will start that class on the 13th. Although Lent doesn't actually start until the 14th, we start it here, the program here on the Tuesday on Mardi Gras Day, the day before Ash Wednesday, which is early this year, February 14, which is also, of course, Valentine's Day. So Ash Wednesday and Valentine's Day on the same day is a little odd, doesn't happen very often. Hello, Roseanne. Good to have you here with us tonight. So that's what's going to be going on. And Will Willimon, for those of you who don't know, is a fascinating guy. For most of his career, he was professor of preaching at, wait, I'm going to misspeak. I'm not sure he was professor of preaching. He was the chaplain at Duke Divinity. He was the chaplain of Duke University in the chapel at Duke University. I believe he was also on faculty at Duke Divinity School. And that was most of his career. He is very widely considered to be one of the best preachers in the English language today. Can we eat pancakes or fastnacks while yes, you may certainly eat pancakes or fastnacks or Crumpy's Donuts. For those of you who are not in Hagerstown. We have a local donut shop, Crumpy's, that's only open at night because they consider donuts to be dessert food, not breakfast food. So I would recommend, if you don't have Fosnacks, you can eat Crumpy's Donuts instead. So certainly do that. At any rate, so Will Willimon was at the chapel at Duke Divinity School at Duke University. I believe he was also on faculty at Duke Divinity School part-time. And he also, after that, was a bishop. And just a great guy. And you might have seen him in the original Disciple Bible Study that came out on VHS. He had one of the presentations when he talked about water, which is how he pronounces it. Water has an H in it when he says water. Hey, Charles, good to have you here tonight. All right, so that's what's going on in the coming weeks. I hope you are excited about that and participate. There is a video that goes with the series. Those of you participating online during the 8 o'clock thing will not have access to the video. So if you're able, and that's not something that I can stream online because it's copyrighted. If any of you happen to have an Amplify account through Cokesbury, you can watch it there, I think. All right, without further ado, let's go ahead and get into tonight's lesson. So let's pray, shall we? Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, for you alone are my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Now, getting into the lesson, this is going to be slightly different than what I sent you today, because I realized doing the study, the exegesis, that I had made an error in my paraphrasing. I had misunderstood the text, which is what happens when you do your paraphrasing before you do your exegesis. And this is perhaps an argument for me doing it in reverse order, but I'm not going to start doing that because it's more difficult and takes more time. So if you're following along with what I sent you today, see if you can spot the difference. I'll bet you can. So listen for the word of our Lord. I say that as if I'm reading. This, once again, is not technically scripture. It's a retelling of the story. David asked the Lord, "Should I go to one of the cities in Judah?" The Lord said, "Yes, go to Hebron." So David and his men took their families and settled there. The tribe of Judah gathered and anointed him their king. The people of Jabesh Gilead told David that it had been their people who retrieved Saul's body and buried him. David said, "God bless you. I pray that God will reward you for this, and I will too. And I'm the king now, so take courage and be strong." Excuse me. Abner was the king of Saul's army. He and Saul's son Ishbosheth fled across the Jordan River. Abner appointed him king over the northern tribes of Israel. Ishbosheth was 40 years old at the time, and he ruled for 2 years. David ruled over Judah from Hebron for 7.5 years. Abner and his army met Joab and his army at the pool of Gibeon. Abner challenged Joab to settle matters with a contest of champions. Joab agreed, and they each sent 12 men forward. But each man grabbed his opponent by their hair with one hand and thrust his sword with the other. All 24 men died simultaneously, and then all of the others rushed into battle. The fighting was fierce, and David's men won. Joab's brother Asahel could run like a deer, and he chased after Abner. Abner said, "Go fight someone else. If I kill you, I'll never be able to look Joab in the face again." But he wouldn't stop chasing him, so Abner thrust his spear backward and skewered him with the blunt end. When people saw what had happened, everyone froze in place. Joab and his other brother Abishai took off after Abner. The tribe of Benjamin rallied around him, and they took up positions on a hill. But Abner shouted to Joab, "This has to stop. We're all related. The more we kill, the worse this will be for everyone when it's over." And Joab responded, "By God, you're right. And if you hadn't said anything, we'd have kept at this all night." Joab blew the trumpet, and both sides withdrew. David's army had lost 19 men, and Abner's army had lost 360. But the war was not over. It went on for a long time. David's side grew stronger and stronger. Meanwhile, Abner became very powerful in the northern kingdom. One day, Ishbosheth accused him of sleeping with his stepmother, one of Saul's concubines. Abner was furious and said, "What am I, a dog? I've always been loyal to your family. How dare you accuse me of something like this? That's it. God promised the kingdom to David, and I'm giving it to him." Ishbosheth was too scared to say anything. Abner immediately sent messengers to David offering to switch his allegiance. David responded that he would sign a treaty with him if he would return Michal, David's first wife, who had been taken from him. Michal had been remarried to a man named Paltiel. Ishbosheth took her from him and sent her to David. Her husband followed the whole way, weeping. When the trip was nearly over, Abner turned to him and said, "Look, you really need to go home now." And he did. Meanwhile, Abner sent messengers to the elders of the northern tribes to persuade them to accept David as their king. When he arrived, David treated Abner and his men to a feast. Afterward, Abner said, "I will gather the northern tribes to sign a treaty and make you king." David sent him on his way in peace. This is the story of our Lord. Kayleen, good evening. So, what I screwed up in the first draft was saying that the men who were responsible for retrieving Saul and burying him were from Judah. They were not. They're from Jabesh Gilead, which is much further north, up in Saul's territory. I thought that because of the wording and the phrasing made it look like this all happened in the same place with the same group of people, but it did not. So this would have been two separate instances that are just listed there chronologically. So David then is honoring not men of Judah, but men from Saul's territory for their loyalty. So this could be a political play on David's side to win some favor up north of the border. So when last we left off, back before Christmas, Saul and some of his sons died in battle with the Philistines, and that left David with an opening in which he could seize control. And in this week's lesson, that is exactly what David is doing. So here is the traditionally understood chronology of events. Okay, so what is happening here? So remember, first, when Israel came into the land, it was 12 tribes. And they worked sort of in a loose federation where the tribal elders would gather and make decisions collectively, but the individual tribes were not bound by those collective decisions. So if the 12 tribes decided to go to war, or some of the tribes decided to go to war, the other tribes were not obligated to go with them, which caused a lot of problems. So Saul then is the first king of the United Kingdom, which unites all 12 tribes together into one nation. Now, remember, of those 12 tribes, only 11 had land. One of them, the tribe of Levi, did not have land and did not have soldiers because its men were priests, and they did not have an allotment of land. They lived off of the offerings of the people rather than off of their own land. So the northern 10 tribes then are I'm getting ahead of myself. So you've got 12 tribes, 11 of which have land. Okay, Saul is the first king to unite all of them together. Solomon was the last king to rule all of them together. Solomon, David's son Solomon. And then after Solomon's death, they split, and 10 of the tribes broke off to become their own nation. And the remaining tribe that was left was Judah, and Judah became its own nation. And the Levites stuck with Judah, basically. So the 10 tribes of the north became the northern kingdom, which is what most of the Old Testament refers to as, when most of the Old Testament uses the word Israel, it's referring to the northern kingdom. When the Old Testament uses the word Judah, it's referring to the southern kingdom. So unified Israel, the United Monarchy, was much bigger than the area that we call Israel today. It incorporated Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and part of Jordan. Okay, that was unified Israel. What we think of today as Israel is basically Judah, plus that little triangle, that long narrow triangle that goes down to the sea. That was not part of historical Israel. But so what we think of as Israel today, generally speaking, is what the Bible calls Judah. So that's the traditional understood, that's the chronology of the area as traditionally understood in the Bible. So you had 12 tribes that joined together into one kingdom under Saul, and then David's son was the last one to rule over them as a single nation. Then it broke off into two. So what is more likely, and I'm not trying to contradict the history as it is in the Bible here, just we put a layer of interpretation over it. Saul's kingdom is referred to as a kingdom, but it's not like kingdoms as we think of them today. It's sort of a proto-kingdom, because these tribes all still have their own governing structure in place. They still have tribal elders, and they still think of themselves primarily as belonging to a tribe. Just like in the early days of the United States, most people thought of themselves as being citizens of the state that they lived in. And it took a while for the nation to form an identity as a single nation, in which the states were just, geographic units. So Saul's kingdom was a loose-knit kingdom. And then when he died, his son Ishbosheth ruled over the 10 northern tribes, but did not rule over Judah, because that was when David declared himself king over Judah. So Saul's son didn't rule over 12 tribes, he ruled over 10, and David took the rest, okay? Then there was a civil war that lasted for 2 years. David wins and united the tribes into a nation, but that nation only lasted through David's reign and his son Solomon's reign, and then there was another civil war, and they split off permanently into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. So I'm going to side with the folks that say that David and Solomon's rule over the northern 10 tribes was probably tenuous at best. And if you look at the map, I mean, the nation, Judah is just the small part of the southern tip of the nation. There's a large area that stretches way up away from Judah and Jerusalem. So think of it in terms of Britain's United Kingdom, okay? Britain, the UK is a United Kingdom, but it's two countries, Scotland and England, okay? And they are ruled together because the two monarchical lines, the two dynasties intermarried, making the heir the single throne over both kingdoms. And, and Scotland has multiple times thought, maybe we don't want to be a part of this anymore, okay? So that's probably what the United Monarchy was like under David and under Solomon. And under Saul, it probably wasn't even that unified. It was probably, very much seen as an experiment at the time. And add on to that the whole area was very sparsely populated compared to today, even compared to a couple hundred years later into history. It was not yet a dense, and the cities that are named are not what we would think of as cities. Jerusalem was not, you think of the old city of Jerusalem. The old city of Jerusalem is not anywhere near, doesn't date back anywhere near as far as the time that we're talking about right now. Jerusalem was more of a fortified town on a hill than it was a city on a hill. And most of the cities probably were more like fortified towns. Some of them weren't even fortified, and David had to go to work doing that. So in today's story, David is actually kind of in the back seat, and Joab and Abner are the key players. So Joab is David's right hand man, and Abner had been Saul's right hand man, but Saul is now dead, so now he's Ishbosheth's right hand man. And some would say, or is he actually the guy who's in charge? Now, here's the thing about me reading these stories and my own biases. I hate Joab the way I hate Darth Vader. I love doing it. Joab's story is so much fun to read. It wouldn't have been fun to live, and he would not have been a fun guy to know. But thousands of years later, boy, is it a fun story to read, because it is just epic, the stuff that this guy does. And his personality is just spectacularly well fleshed out. I'd say the stories that we have of Joab sort of we walk away from the scriptures with a much better sort of comprehensive understanding of Joab, I would say, than we do of David. David's a complicated character. Joab is not. We understand Joab pretty well, pretty early on. I've not given as much attention to Abner over the years. His entire story pretty much is in this lesson that we've got today, and a little bit his last chapter, the end of Abner's life, is going to be in the next lesson that we come back to. I tend to like Abner, so that gives me a biased reading of this, because my inclination is to read it like this, to say that David was a good man, at least at this point in his life. I'm not going to say he's a good man later in life, but at this point he's still a good man who has a very bad man serving as his enforcer. Joab does all of David's dirty work. Usually he does it without even telling David that he's going to do it, so that David cannot be in trouble for it after the fact. Gives David plausible deniability. You'll see what I mean the next time we meet. It starts, that kind of stuff. So I'm tempted to say David was a good guy with a bad guy as his enforcer, whereas Saul was a bad guy whose right-hand man was a good guy. And so Abner would not have been Saul's enforcer then. He would have been the guy who exerts a positive influence and who restrains Saul's worst impulses and is loyal to Saul's family, which is why he supports Ishbosheth after Saul dies. But then he realizes that this king is useless, and he switches his allegiance to David. That's how I'm tempted to read this story. It's not how most people read this story. Most people have a real hatred for Abner. They don't like Joab either, but they hate Abner because they consider him to be David's foil in this. I don't know that he is David's foil in this, but there is another view, which is that both Joab and Abner are actually self-serving in their positions. So Abner intends to use Ishbosheth as a puppet, and according to that school of thought, he probably did sleep with Saul's wife. Well, she wouldn't have been a wife, she'd been a concubine. And stepmother isn't really the right word, it just was easier to use in the paraphrasing. So he probably then did sleep with the concubine as a way of exerting dominance over Saul's family. And then, according to that school of thought, he only switched sides because he realized that the side he was on simply could not win. So there's probably some truth in that perspective. But I think that when you read this story today, you see a level of wisdom in Abner that you just don't see in Joab. Joab's got some very good practical wisdom. He's a very good tactician. He can be very diplomatic when he wants to be, but he's not ethical. Whereas I see at least some, Joab has no ethical compass at all, no moral compass at all. Abner, by my reading, does have a moral compass. So those are the two main characters. Now there's two women in the story as well who are very clearly written as side characters. One of those is Saul's concubine, Ritzpah. And I did not use her name in the text, not because I was trying to be sexist and take her name away from her, but because these Hebrew names are a little hard. Ritzpah, I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing it right. Rizpah. The name's only in there once, and when a name is only in there once, I generally only use it for. I generally don't use Hebrew names unless you need to know the name, because this is a recurring character. You're going to see this person again. You need to know that it's the same person. The only other time, like I do use Paltiel's name, her husband's name, because the pronouns start piling up, and you need to get a name in there so you know who's talking to who. At any rate, so Ritzpah is one of the two women. The other one is Michal, who was David's first wife. Was Abner with Ritzpah? We don't know for sure. How did Ritzpah feel about it? Doesn't say. Does she have anything to say about the accusation? Doesn't say. If she did have anything to say, it probably would not have mattered to the narrator, so it's not going to be recorded, because if she has something to say, it didn't count. Let's put it that way. So she has no role in the decision-making process here, nor does Michal. So we know how her second husband feels about this. He's very upset that she's being taken away. He's not just angry. He seems to be truly heartstruck over this. Does she feel the same way about him? We don't know. It doesn't say how she reacted. But she is going to have some lines soon in the coming chapters, and that's going to give us a bit of a hint as to how Michal feels about this. And spoiler alert, she's not happy. Okay. So, anyway, what does this story tell us? Oh, hi, Sandy. What does this story tell us about God? Well, I mean, there's the obvious lesson that God works through rascals. We're going to see that over and over again. David's take on God here seems to be, and we've seen this before in these stories, David believes that God is going to take care of the bad guys, and we should just let that play out. So David knows that certain people have to be out of the way for him to have for his authority to be secure. But David does not feel compelled to make that happen. He trusts that God will make it happen. So he's not going to get his hands dirty. He's not going to sin for the benefit of his destiny as king. He trusts that God will do that. In the meantime, he's going to make preparations so that when God does take the bad guys out of the way, he's going to be there when it happens and able to step in when his opportunity comes. So that seems to be David's assumption. Is that our take on it? Do we believe that God takes care of bad guys by sending other bad guys to take care of business? Or is God just letting Darwin do his thing? Or could it be both things at the same time? Yeah, I'm not sure I know the answer to that. It's a great question. I don't know that we need to know the answer to live faithfully. I am going to say it's best to let God says, "Revenge is mine," saith the Lord. It's best to let God take care of the bad guys. Working within the system, we can take care of bad guys. Don't get me wrong, but David's not willing to step outside of the system to take care of the bad guys, and that's probably a good rule for us too. Do bad guys get sent by God to take bad guys out? I'm not sure this is comparable, but I'm going to tell you a story. There are lots of examples in Methodist local history of pastors who had shown themselves to be either not particularly talented or to have a temper that was ill-suited to ministry, being sent to serve congregations that had developed a reputation for being combative. Okay, so the common interpretation is that when pastors are bad, bishops punish them by sending them to congregations who are bad. I was talking to a retired district superintendent who was teaching at Wesley when I was taking my doctoral program. I asked him if he believed that that was true, and he said, no, I don't believe that is true, but I'll tell you what I do believe. He said, I believe that bad pastors and bad churches have a way of finding each other in our system. So in other words, if we have a pastor that we know isn't going to accomplish anything, we can't get, it's very difficult to get rid of them. Okay, it's like a tenure system. Okay, you know, I mean, if they do something that's breaking rules, we can get rid of them. But if they're just incompetent or mean, we can't get rid of them easily. Okay, so if we know a pastor isn't going to accomplish, Dave and Barry are here. Hey, Dave and Barry. If we know a pastor isn't going to accomplish anything, what do we do with that pastor? Well, we send them to a church that we know doesn't have any potential, okay? Because there are churches that have proven that they don't want to grow, they don't want to be healthy, they've had opportunities to turn around, they rejected them. So if we have a congregation that we know would not respond well if Jesus himself was sent there, then we'll send to that congregation the pastors that we know aren't going to accomplish anything no matter where they're sent. So bad pastors and bad churches have a way of finding each other. So maybe it is the case that bad actors have a way of finding each other and doing God's work on each other. You're doing the Lord's work. I don't know. Is that an unhealthy way to view things? I don't know. I think it's a realistic way to look at things. All right. What does this story tell us about ourselves? Well, what Abner said. We need to remember that when we are fighting against another person, we're fighting against family at some level. Now, in Israel, it was obvious. These people all knew each other. Like I said, it was a sparsely populated area. Each tribe was a family in and of itself. All the tribes were related. They lived near each other, so these people knew each other. But it's always true to a point. It's always true to a point. We're all God's family. So, you know, and even when you're talking about global affairs, the more people you kill, the less the eventual peace will actually feel like peace. Because at some point, we've all got to live with the results of whatever happened. And the worse we let things get, the harder that is going to be. So what then does this tell us about our relationship with God? Does God think that the ends justify the means? Jesus said that there were two rules that were more important than all the other rules. One of those rules was love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength. The other rule is to love your neighbor as yourself. So those rules are more important than the other rules. That's what that says explicitly. Okay? All the other rules are subordinate to them. It's not, it's not just the case that all of the others are wrapped up in them. By saying they're wrapped up in them, it means that you use these two rules to understand the others. Ethics don't work unless some values are more important than others and are used to interpret the others. If all of the values are equal, you cannot function. Okay? An ethical dilemma is a situation in which two values come into direct conflict with each other, and you have to choose which value am I going to uphold and which value am I going to violate for the sake of the one that I'm going to uphold. And in real life, that happens. Happens all the time. And the more authority you have in your station in life, the more often you're going to have to deal with ethical dilemmas. I'm in a couple of positions right now where I grade papers, and one of the questions that we deal with is how do you solve an ethical dilemma. And a lot of people don't seem to understand what this means to work out an ethical dilemma. And what they tend to think is an ethical dilemma is when you have to make an unpopular decision, and then you have to be able to justify that decision by explaining how what your reasoning was, what value you were trying to uphold, and why this decision upholds that value. That's not what it means to have an ethical dilemma, because when you make an unpopular decision, it's not enough to understand the value behind the way you're going. Okay, so in other words, you've got two choices: this one or this one, and this one is the one people want you to do, but you're going to go with this one. It's not enough to be able to understand and explain why you went with this one. You have to also understand why they wanted you to go with this one. What was the value behind it? Because if you don't understand the value behind their decision, you can't weigh those values against each other appropriately. And then you're not going to be sure that you did the right thing. So, for example, let's say we're talking about immigration policy. Okay, both sides have there's really more than two sides, but there's two sides in the public debate. One is close the borders all the way. The other is open them all the way. Most of us aren't really in either of those two camps, but that's the way it's portrayed to us. And it would be very easy for one side to say, well, that side wants to close the borders because they're racist. Okay? And some of them, in fact, do that. And it would be very easy for the other side to say, well, that side wants the borders open because they hate rural America, they hate the rural economy, and they hate blue-collar labor, and they're trying to destroy that section of our economy and to remove it from our nation. Okay. Now, in fact, neither side is motivated by either of those two values, predominantly. I mean, there are people on both sides that probably are, okay? Because you can certainly see some of that sentiment in the arguments of both sides. But those are not the actual driving values. Okay, so if you're going to decide, are we going to go with either of these two policies or something in between, what are the actual values that are at stake? Okay, because if we're just going to label one side, then we don't have to consider that value. If we're gonna, it's creating a straw argument. Okay, by creating a straw argument, that allows us to not consider the value behind the other side's argument. So then your value is the only value left standing, and then you don't have to wrestle with an ethical dilemma because there's only one value to defend. Well, usually when something reaches this level, it's because there's two values to be defended, and they're in conflict with each other. So then you have to make a decision. It has to be an ethically mature decision. Labeling and strong arguments does not help anyone. It certainly does not help God advance God's kingdom. All right. So, do I have any news to talk about tonight? Not really. Those of you Otterbein folks, if you missed church on Sunday, I apologize for not yet sending out an email to this effect, but we'd originally talked about doing the strategy retreat on January 27th. We are not going to do that. We're going to do it on February the 3rd. And the reason is because the conference is having a cooperative parish summit to talk about how cooperative parishes can be set up in regions where churches pool their resources and their staffing budgets. And we've been invited to attend that, and a few of us who are officers are going to attend that. We can't do both things at the same time, so we're going to do the strategy retreat on February 3rd. That also gives us more time to prepare for it. So be aware of that. If you have anything that you want us to discuss or answer at the February 3rd strategy retreat, please be sure that I or somebody else in leadership knows that so we can include that. We always want to be as forthcoming with information as we can. So once again, there will not be class next week. Next week is the 16th. There will be class on the 23rd and the 30th. But not the 6th. On the 6th, the bishop is going to be here hosting an event at Otterbein. And when the bishop is here, I'm busy. And then when we come back on the 13th, we will be in our new format. So we're off next week. Then we'll have 2 lessons on David. And then we'll take another week off. And then we will... Maybe I'll send this out in an email for you guys. I don't usually use the email for that, but maybe that would be the easiest thing to do. John, yes, Peter's service is going to be at the church. His service is going to be at the church on January the 20th at 11 o'clock with a luncheon to follow. Yes, it will be at the church. I guess I didn't make that clear in the email. I apologize for that. Yes, it will be at the church. All right, do we have any other questions for tonight? I'm not seeing anything coming in. So until next week, don't forget to email me any other questions you have, or you can do like John just did and put them in the chat, and I'll answer them immediately. If you like this study, don't forget to share it with somebody else. You can like it, you can share it, you can click it, you can do whatever. So once again, Happy New Year, and let's go ahead and we will close out with the Serenity Prayer. God, give me the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, the courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. All right, folks, thank you all for being here tonight, and I will see you in 2 weeks.